I'm Whitney.
I'm Mindy.
And I'm Deb.
We're three best friends who love nerdy things.
Well, some people think we're nerdy, but we think we're pretty awesome.
This is our nerdiest thing.
This season, we are discussing A Court of Thorns and Roses and all of Sarah J. Maas's books. We are spoiler friendly, so listen at your own risk. Hello, fellow nerds. Welcome to today's episode of Our Nerdiest Thing. Today, we're going to be talking about chapters 13 and 14 of A Court of Thorns and Roses. But first, Mindy is going to give us our nerdiest vocabulary.
Well, first of all, I want to go back to last week since I had to miss it. I missed you all, and I'm back, bitches. So, last chapters, we had a being that it was the one that looked like Feyre's dad, and in the pronunciation guide that I found on the wiki, it's phonetically spelled P-U-K-A-H. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and say right now that everybody here at this table calls it a puka, and I'm sure everybody on the face of this earth calls it a puka, but being the word nerd that I am, when you look at that phonetically, it actually is supposed to sound like puka. I don't think they meant to say that because that just sounds gross. So I'm going to go with puka. So the other two pronunciations that I have for this week are two more fairies that we meet in these chapters. And the first one is the Suriel. Technically, you could look at the pronunciation with the syllables and you could say Suriel, but I just think Suriel sounds nicer, even though it's not a very nice creature.
I say Suriel, too.
It just sounds, it flows better.
I like to eat cereal. I'm really tired and feeling a bit peckish, so pardon me this episode.
Oh, I can't wait to talk about that. And
About the cereal or about the cereal?
About the cereal. Now I can't distinguish between them.
What's your favorite type of cereal? So how do you pronounce it, Mindy? Because now I'm confused.
Cereal.
Cereal.
You're saying it right. You're
Now
just,
I don't know how I'm going to be able to listen.
you're using
to
it
you
in the
while you
wrong
talk.
context.
So, moving on. The last one is the other beings that we haven't actually met by the end of the chapter, but they're there. The Suriel announces their presence.
I'm sorry. Again.
That's all you're going to hear now.
I'm so sorry. Carry on.
I'm just going to say it really fast. The Naga.
I thought I was holding it together, and I got like 2 seconds. I was like, I'm doing so good, and then I couldn't.
We're a little slap happy.
Oh, shit.
Well, thank you for that, Mindy.
You're not thanking me for my interpretation.
Thank you for your entertainment during that segment of our podcast. So now we're going to do our nerdiest recap. So, Deb, would you please draw a name? I'll get our 30-second timer ready.
I always draw myself.
Sucker.
You should have just been like, oh no, it says Whitney.
Yeah, she never looks. Let's just keep saying it's her every week.
That's true. I just trust you. All right. Are you ready?
Okay.
Set and go.
So Feyre goes into the study or the library and is looking at all the books, but like Tamlin totally flexes his power by turning on the lights, and she turns down his offer to help her write her letter because he figures that out somehow, and she's messes around in the library for a little bit. And she sees a mural there, and then she asks Lucian how to trap a Suriel. Not a Fruit Loop, but a Suriel. And then she goes and traps one, and it tells her lots of things, and then she gets attacked by a Naga.
That was very good, Mindy.
And you showed her 4 seconds instead of I tried to show you 7 with 2 fingers.
5. Just the one hand.
You
5
know what?
seconds.
Last week you weren't going to get there anyway.
No, I did not do a good job last week. That is
Just
very
for the
true.
record, for everyone offline, Whitney's like, I'm just going to like tell it how it is really, really quickly. And then she got through 1 chapter last time. So, whatever.
Yeah, it was not good. I'll do better next time. maybe. We'll see.
We'll see.
That's part of the fun.
Let's talk about the study scene, the library scene a little bit, because there were a lot of really interesting things that I kind of clocked and made a lot of notes about. We talked the first episode about this is a Beauty and the Beast type story, and this very much was the library scene from the movie, right? Beauty and the Beast. But what I thought was really interesting is in the, cartoon Beauty and the Beast, the library is like Belle's haven, right? Like it's a very awe-inspiring place that she is immediately in love with because she loves to read so much. But for Feyre, because she can't read, it's a source of panic and shame and struggle. And I just thought that was really interesting to take this kind of iconic part of this movie that we all pretty much know and to kind of flip it and make it something that's not positive, not a positive experience for our heroine.
I hadn't thought of that.
I hadn't either. Like I didn't even go there to the library scene in, that we're familiar with.
Yeah.
So that's really cool.
It was very similar, just negative.
Yeah.
Where I went to in the library scene is her like singing in the ladder, like gliding across the rails while her hands out. I mean, for those of you that can't see because you're listening to us, I did wave my hand up, just like this.
You gestured something because I think last week or week before we were talking about how long Feyre has been at Supreme Court, and I think we all said we thought it was a month, but in this chapter she'd been here for a week. Like what?
So much longer.
So much has happened in just a short amount of time. Poor Feyre. So yeah, she is wanting to be in the study because she wants to write a letter to her family. She's wanting to, first of all, let them know that she's okay, but mostly she's trying to warn them about the blight, which we know as people who have read the whole series, we know that that's Amarantha. Feyre does not know that at this point. So she's wanting to give them a warning, but she can't write, and she knows that she can't write. Tamlin also knows that she can't write because when he found her in the middle of the night when she was fixing his hand, not fixing it, but wrapping up his hand, she was making that map of his manor, and he saw like how elementary basically it was, and he was like, oh, you can't write, can you? So it kind of rubbed me the wrong way that he's like, all right, bye. He knows what she wants to do, and he knows that she is illiterate, and he's just like, okay, peace out.
But he does offer to help her
the next day.
Okay, yeah.
The next day, but initially he just leaves her there.
That is not good enough for Whitney.
Well, I'm not a Tamlin apologist, but I do think that I give him more credit sometimes than maybe either he deserves. I definitely give him more credit than other people in the fandom do, but. And we'll get into it more in later chapters, but the knowing that she struggles with this and the lack of helping her really just I can't get over that. But yeah, the next day he comes back and offers help, and she's like, no. And so I wonder if
she's kind of bitchy about it.
I know, right?
I don't know if I would help her either.
I get why. Well, I wanted to talk about that.
Okay.
But let me just go ahead and talk about that then. So she is basically in her own head about the fact that she's in this study, she's in this library, she's looking at all these books, she's wanting to write this letter, and she's just thinking over and over how she feels basically so stupid because she doesn't know how to read and write. And she is thinking about the things that Tamlin has said to her. She's thinking about what she assumes Lucian thinks of her. She assumes that they both think that she's just some dumb human girl that is insignificant. Tamlin calls her lack of knowledge basically a shortcoming because she says something about him like making fun of her about it, and he's like, why would I make fun of you for a shortcoming that is not your fault? And it's like he's trying to be nice in that moment, but he's just pointing out to her the insecurity that she already has, that she is somehow less than because she is missing this piece of her education. There were a couple of things about that I thought were really interesting. So she was talking about her mom and said that her mom neglected our education. And she was talking about Nesta, Elaine, and Feyre, right? All three of them.
But Nesta and Elaine can read.
They can read, but basically what Feyre is saying is they learned how to read and write, and that's pretty much all they learned how to do. So, like, they're literate, but their mom did not do anything else with their education. So Nesta and Elaine in other ways are also ignorant, not in the derogatory sense, but in the literal, like, there are things you do not know sense, right?
They're definitely not worldly smart. Like
Right.
they're all very naive, but Feyre has a little bit more in terms of street smarts, at least.
Right.
She could survive on her own, and Nesta and Elaine would either get stabbed by someone for pissing them off, or they would starve to death.
Yeah. And so she's thinking about mean things that Nesta has said to her. Basically, she's hearing Nesta's voice in her head. And again, I want to remind everybody that at this point in time, Nesta, we find out in book 3, Nesta did not know that Feyre truly could not read and write. Nesta thought that Feyre's education had gone to the same level as Nesta's and Elaine. So she thought that all 3 of them could read and write, and that was pretty much it. So when Nesta is being, bitchy to Feyre about her education, she thinks that Feyre's on the same level as her. So she's not truly talking down to Feyre like, you're not as smart as us, or I know more than you, you can't do as much as me, because she thinks they're on the same level. So Nesta is really like bashing herself with the things that she's saying to Feyre. So I just wanted to point that out.
Mindy and I today heard from a friend, and they hated Mindy heard from this friend. Mindy was in the car with me and telling me about it. They said they hated Silver Flames, and they were just trying to get through it because they can't stand Nesta. And we were like, oh, that's too bad.
I'm like, sorry
That
for
makes
you.
me sad.
Also, don't rush through those sex scenes.
I know. I'm like I said before, if you're not going to read it for Nesta, read it for Cassian, because
I know, right?
damn.
I love Cassian. So while she's in the library, Feyre, first of all, she says that there's so many books and shelves that she can't see the walls at all. So later on, just a side note, we find out that Tamlin's father had taken Rhysand's mom's and sister's wings and hung them up in their study. And so there's just a question of like, where are those wings at this point? Are they hidden on the wall somewhere and she just can't see them? Or did Tamlin already get rid of them at this point? That's just a side note. But she goes and finds this mural and this map. And before we really get into the map, I just wanted to do a quick comparison, because much like when Feyre arrives at Springcourt, there are a lot of parallels between this scene in the study and looking at the map in Springcourt and what happens in Mist and Fury when she's at Night Court for the first time and Rhysand brings her to a type of study and shows her the map of their world. So first of all, in the Springcourt, the study is I wrote down very Beauty and the Beast. It's huge. It's a huge library. There's lots of lights. There are so many books. You can't see the walls. It's a very like public, huge, sprawling space. In the Night Court, when Rhys takes her to show her the map, he takes her up to the top of a tower where there's a round chamber that seems like a fairly small-ish room that just has a black stone table and a huge map of the world on the wall. And then there's also a map on the table. And so the Night Court setting of looking at this map compared to Spring is much more intimate. It's much more private. It's much more personal for its High Lord. And I just think that that's an interesting parallel, because I think it shows Rhysand's trust in her. Like, he's bringing her into a private, personal space because he trusts her. And Tamlin's like, whatever, this is the public library. Like, there's nothing really like personal to him about it. And the maps themselves have some interesting differences. So in the Springcourt, when she's looking at the map, everything in Prythian is marked, but she can't read what any of them say, right? She can tell what the court is based on the artwork. The Autumn Court looks like autumn, Springcourt looks like spring, and all that. But she notices that the human lands aren't marked, and that gives her the impression that the human lands just don't matter, that the Fae don't care about the human lands. The map at the Night Court, everything is marked except for the Night Court. And Feyre gets the impression that the reason the Night Court is not marked is because it is so vital. And he doesn't want any of that information or intel to get back to Tamlin. So it's the same basic thing, right? Like it's all marked except for one space, but the intention is completely different. And that I think says a lot about Tamlin and says a lot about Rhys. The Night Court gets a ton more description from Feyre's narration than any of the other courts. She focuses on Night Court a lot while she's in Tamlin's study looking at this map. And it says that as she's looking at the Night Court, the hair on her arms gets raised, which I think is interesting.
I noticed that too.
There's a connection there, right?
Yeah.
Like there's something really meaningful about that.
Well, I think they want you to think that it frightens her.
Yeah.
But when I pictured it, I pictured she got goosebumps. You know,
me too. And I think she thinks it's kind of scary, but yeah, no, I think it's knowing what we know now, right, after book 2, I think there's a connection there that she just isn't aware of yet. And then the last comparison thing that I wrote down is, Tamlin takes her to the study and then leaves her there to struggle with the map, to struggle with what task she's trying to fulfill. She's struggling through books. She wants to write this letter and doesn't know how. And he's just kind of like lets her struggle, whether that's because he knows that she'll turn him down, which she does, whether it doesn't even occur to him to offer the help at that moment. I don't know, but she is left to kind of be ashamed and to feel shame that she is struggling so much. Where on the flip side, when she's at Night Court, when Rhys is showing her this map, he stands there, he asks her questions, he explains the whole thing to her, he involves her in an actual conversation as opposed to giving her a lecture or just, here, look at this and I'm going to leave, bye. And he takes the time, and we'll talk more about this in later chapters too, but he takes the time to teach her, to see what she actually knows, to be encouraging, and to make her feel important, to make her feel like she's worth helping instead of making her feel insignificant and stupid like Tamlin ultimately does.
Well, and I will say, because, I'm definitely not a Tamlin apologist, but I will say Feyre was a little bit more open to talking to Rhys about that at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, quite frankly, if she was treating me the way that she treated Tamlin in that moment, I wouldn't have stayed and helped her either. Like, she is... But here's the thing, too. She was kidnapped. She's bitter that she can't go home. Even though at this point, and we, you just said a minute ago, we figured out she's been there for a week. Yeah. So she really let go of this guilt around her family real fucking fast. I just want to point that out. Having said that, she feels very bitter towards him. And at that point, she's not feeling really bitter towards Rhysand. And I personally don't want to be around her right now. Yeah. She's not being kind. But again, I get why she's not. So I think it's hard for me now that I'm doing this super deep dive because, I mean, quite frankly, if you've read this book and you reread it, you're kind of glossing over this part a little bit because you know the history of the books and all that. Now that I'm rereading it, I'm like, she's not really making herself very open to these people at all.
Dare I say that she's a lot like Nesta?
A little bit.
I think you should say that.
I mean, she is though, right? Like she's being rude. She's being, like you said, not open. Like that is Nesta. Yeah. Nesta's a lot better at being a bitch, right? Yeah. Like she's
I don't know if Feyre's doing a really good job.
Well, Nesta's better with like her sharp tongue, right? Like she's better at saying something that's really going to hurt you, and Feyre's not that good at that.
Feyre says something though that I wrote in my book. I wrote, "Damn, that's cold." Hold on. Oh, I said, "Damn, that's low." When they start to get into the argument, she says, "I've already given enough to them." And Tamlin says, "So you'll let Lucien take you on hunts?" And she interrupts him and goes, "Lucien doesn't pretend to be anything but what he is," which is also not true. Yes. And so like she's not significantly bitter towards Lucien, even though he treats her worse than Tamlin does. And it's more of this situational, like he's the one that took her, he's the one that threatened her family, did all these things. And at this point, she doesn't realize that he's High Lord and he's also the one that's made sure that her family's taken care of. And I will say myself, I wouldn't be open either, but she is not making herself out to be the person that she actually ultimately is.
Right.
Well, and I 100% agree that Rhysand is better than Tamlin.
100%.
100%. But I also, something I realized something that struck me as we're doing this deep dive, because the first time I read it, I'm like, oh, Tamlin, he's so great, blah, blah, blah. And then you realize, he's maybe not that great. But now I'm kind of looking back and I feel kind of bad for him because, you got to look when you were doing that description, it made me remember that Tamlin is not Rico Suave. Like he is like downright bad with the ladies, right? And Reese is like, Mr. Cool. Like he definitely knows how to get the girls. And so like we're dealing with somebody who literally does not, like he's a social weirdo. Like he doesn't know how to like be a social person.
Also, when she goes into the night court with Reese Ann, she meets all of his friends. He's around all these people that, really love him. And her being around Tamlin, she doesn't know there's other people there, first of all. But Lucian doesn't seem to have a warm relationship with him. When she goes under the mountain, nobody likes Tamlin either. Like, I feel like it was almost easier for her and the reader to like Reese faster because of the way it was written. You're glaring at me, Whitney.
No, I'm not glaring. I'm just thinking. I get what you're saying, but also like the other side of that is why is it that Tamlin doesn't have people that care about him?
Well, because
you know what I mean,
right? Well,
he's a social weirdo.
Well, he is, but part of it too is not all of Rhysand's people are under the mountain, and all of Tamlin's are.
That's true.
Yeah.
So Rhysand made sure that those people were protected, which is also why he's the best.
Right.
So I am still number one Rhysand, but I'm saying, she doesn't get to see him around his people, and honestly, we learn in book 2 when she goes back, he's still not beloved.
Right.
Like we learn that, right? And the only person that likes him is Ianthe, and it's because she's a conniving bitch.
Well, I was just thinking about in Mist and Fury when he's having the tithe and they're having like a party. I can't remember if it's at the actual tithe or if it's like a luncheon or something before the tithe, but Feyre's talking about how she's standing off by herself watching Tamlin with his friends. And I was just thinking like that's the only time I can think of that Tamlin has any friends besides Lucian, like, and he's standing, she's watching him like talk and laugh and make jokes. And she's noticing basically that he says he doesn't like to be he doesn't like being the High Lord. He doesn't like doing the job, but it looks like he's enjoying himself quite a bit. And she's feeling so awkward. And so like, I do not want to be here at all. And I just wonder like how much their roles flip a little bit.
Did you notice, not to move ahead, but speaking of the tithe, did you notice in this chapter or the next chapter that we see those water nymphs for the first time?
I did. Yeah.
I had never caught that.
I highlighted that too.
Yeah, I was like, oh, there they are.
It's like, I could have sworn I saw, 4 heads. I'm like, you did.
Well, and my daughter's reading the Throne of Glass series right now, and she's like, well, why are they doing this? And why was this character there? And blah, blah, blah. And I was like, every character
matters
that is brought up in these books is 100% part of the story. Yep. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes because even in this series, which is nowhere near done, you start thinking of characters and you're like, why was that there? And it will be told.
All will be revealed.
So let's talk more about the mural and the map because I know that you guys had some things that you wanted to talk about.
One thing I noticed, it's very quickly said that the cauldron has some small ancient symbols on it. Yeah. And my mind immediately went to the word marks.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, this is where my mind went because I underlined that too. Let me read those whole couple of sentences first. So it says, a mighty black cauldron held by glowing, I'm going to point that out, slender female hands, female, in a starry endless night. Those hands tipped it over, golden sparkling liquid pouring out over the lip. No, not sparkling, but effervescent, with small symbols, perhaps of some ancient fairy language. So if you've been listening so far, I continue to believe that Bryce is from the past whenever she goes into Prythian. And there's a lot of similarities here because, they tell her no one spoke in her language for over 1,000 years. There's ancient fairy language on here, but also she's known for having a glow in her body, and her brother is known as Night in the second Crescent City book. So I mean, I am just proving myself right over and over and over again.
There's definitely evidence.
I mean, there is, and again, I could be completely proven wrong. Whitney loves to do PowerPoints before new books come out and go over them with us. And when she did one for the most recent From Blood and Ash books that came out, she proved me wrong in a lot of ways. So it's okay. It's okay to be wrong. But part of the fun thing about these books is having your own theories and thinking about it more thoroughly.
I love that though. I didn't expand on it that much. And I think it's really cool.
It's a little bit of the self-fulfilling prophecy too, because I'm looking for it, right?
True.
But she is very specific, right?
Yeah.
But can I ask you guys, so, because I've seen people ask in some fan groups before, like, what they think the cauldron looks like. And here it says it is a big black cauldron, which to me really makes it sound dumb. Like, it sounds like I watched part of Hocus Pocus 2 with my kids tonight, and I'm picturing like a cauldron that like Winifred Sanderson is standing over.
That's what I picture too.
And like, I don't think it's that simple, right? Because also, like, does it mean it was like a big bathtub that Nesta and Elaine went into?
I mean, it was big enough for them to get dunked into, right?
Right, yeah.
Just so you know, when they go in there, like, I picture them like in a cauldron, like it's a big pot of soup.
But
Yeah, me too.
there's like a fire under it, right?
I think I've envisioned the exact same
But like,
thing.
so is it something that like can change shape and what it looks like depending on what the vessel itself needs to be? Because preferably in my imagination, I like to not think of it as a brownstone pot.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going with. It can change.
I don't have it with me, but I'll have to look at the page overlay that I have for Mist and Fury, because the very last illustration is Nesta's hand coming out of the cauldron. And I'm pretty sure that they drew it as like what you're talking about.
Did
that
you
kind of
see
cauldron.
the Tony Vianto drawing of Nesta going into the cauldron, and instead of pointing at the King of Hybern,
was
she's
flipping
flipping him off?
Yeah, I
like,
saw
that
that.
is such a badass drawing.
Yeah, I like that one a lot.
When did it say, like, they didn't say which finger she pointed at him?
Right, exactly.
So one other thing that stood out to me about the map is she talks, when she's describing the Night Court in great detail, like you're talking about. When she first mentions it, she says it's the sprawling, massive territory of the Night Court. And in my opinion, like, I thought like everybody was divided equally and everybody had the same amount of land, but it seems like the Night Court is much bigger. And then on the flip side, when she's talking about when Hybern, or after the war and after the treaty, when they were forced to give over some of their, like, to the line of demarcation for the human lands, it's the Spring Court that gets sort of dinged the most on that. Like, they bore the brunt of whatever, of that whole separation.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because when they started talking about the map, I actually went to the map in the beginning of the book because I'm a very visual person and I needed to see this. And I mean, she's right. The Spring Court gets divided in half. And I think whenever I was looking at the map on the left, and we can post this on Instagram with this episode, but on the left, there's the small island of Hybern, and then you've got a bigger island, which is all of the courts and the mortal lands. And then you've got another land to the right of that, which I thought was a bigger like zoom out of the fairylands, but it's not the way
It's
that she
different.
describes it.
Yeah.
It's a continuation of land, and I never realized the line going across it is a continuation of the wall. So as I'm looking at the map, have you ever noticed, because we have talked a lot in this podcast about the lore that deals with Scottish and Irish and Celtic origins, and how much the middle island looks like Ireland, and then how this
gosh, it
world that
does.
goes over looks like Scotland and going down into
Yeah.
more of the EU.
Oh, that's
which I'm
crazy.
Like, yeah, I never caught that until
See,
just
I don't
now.
get to look at that much because I have it on Kindle, and so I can't see the map on Kindle.
Yeah.
And every time we say the map, I want to sing that dumb Dora song.
Well, and to your point, Mindy, about Spring Court getting the brunt of things, I don't know if they tell us this, but I would assume that that's because Tamlin's dad fought for Hybern.
True.
In the
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
war, Tamlin's
So it's more of like a punishment.
That's yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that we ever get specifically told that. Like, they lose most of their land because they were the ones that lost.
Yeah.
But that makes sense to me.
Yeah,
you know?
totally.
Can I ask a dumb question? Because
No.
now I'm a little bit confused. May I, please?
Yes.
It took me a second to realize you said no. Fuck you. I'm going to ask anyway. So I'm a little confused because I thought, because it does talk later about how the king of Hybern 100 years ago started building up an army of spies and people that, he essentially did not like the treaty, right? And
Right.
he wanted to essentially punish the humans and take all their land back. So I thought that all the Fae wanted that, because you just said that Tamlin's dad, was that a war before that? I'm really confused. Do you understand what I'm asking?
I think so, maybe. So the war 500 years ago,
Okay.
that's the war that Rhysand fought in, that Cassian fought in, but that Tamlin was too young to fight in. She asked them, like, did you guys fight in the war? And they were like, dang, we're not that old. But then in Mist and Fury, Rhysand talks about fighting in that war. So the Spring Court, which was Tamlin's dad, because Tamlin was too young, they fought with Hybern to basically like keep the humans as their slaves. And the other courts were fighting with the humans to give them their freedom. And I can't remember if it's Mist and Fury or Wings and Ruin, but Feyre and Rhysand have a conversation. I think it's in Wings and Ruin because I'm pretty sure it's in the library under the House of Wind. But Rhys basically says, like, we had already sent our humans away because we didn't trust them with our information and our magic and our intel and our secrets.
So essentially 100 years ago, the King of Hybern's just up to his old bullshit.
Yes.
Okay. That's why I was a little bit confused. I was like, aren't those two different things? And they are. Okay.
They are two different things. So Hybern spends 400 years being mad that he lost, and 100 years ago tries to like start a riot is what I was going to say. That's not really the right terminology. But
Old white guys really cannot let shit go, can they?
they can't.
I mean, 400 years of a grudge, get past it. Because now there's going to be a high lady who's going to whip yo ass.
Well, and they talk about that in Mist and Fury when Feyre agrees to work with the Night Court. And she's at dinner with the inner circle, and Rhys is like, okay, well, good. I'm glad you're going to work with us because here's the situation. Like, Hybern's up to his bullshit again. And they start talking about it, and they basically say, like, Hybern has kept his kingdom and his island, like, stuck in the past so that his people will get pissy that they miss the good old days when they had the humans oppressed.
So he's never let them move forward so that they'll be resentful about not having slaves.
And so then they will support his
just like
actions.
Old white guys.
I know, right? So that they'll be mad enough to support his actions when he's like, you know what we should do? Go back to the way it used to be. Doesn't that sound familiar?
A little bit.
I just have two more things. One comment, a quick comment, and then I have a question about the mural, and then we can totally move on. When she's describing in the middle of the map the mountain, and it's just, I just think it's so interesting how it's described as bald of snow, bald of life, as if the elements refuse to touch it, and that's a direct quote. Just very interesting. Like when you think of what it actually, like we don't know. If you're reading this for the first time, you don't know what that is, and then you realize later that's, of course, it loves that because biatch is underneath of it. I just thought that was cool. But my question is that later on in chapter, I think 14, Feyre says something. She's talking about something, and she says, "I haven't quite worked up the nerve to request from the Suriel." So it was when she was talking to the Suriel to request something that was in the back of my mind when I saw that mural. And then I went back and read like what she was doing. I don't know what that was.
Let me look at the book really quick. I think I know what you're talking about, but I want to double check before I answer.
While you look, I had a question about the mural too, because it says you've got like the courts divided and then you've got under the mountain on the map. So what court do the mountains belong to?
Yeah, I was wondering that too.
Because the under the mountain mountain? Mm-hmm. The under the mountain doesn't belong to anybody because in one of the later books they talk about, in Wings and Ruin, when they're talking about having the meetings of the High Lord at like a neutral location, she says it would be under the mountain. That was their sacred mountain. It didn't belong to anybody. It was in the middle. That would have been the neutral location, but nobody's willing to go back there because Amaranth ruined it.
Switzerland.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
It used to be.
That's a Twilight reference, y'all. Just so you know. Just so you know.
I can't really find. Do you know where that is exactly?
When she says that, it's. I don't. It's when she's talking to the Suriel. She's already asked, I think, a couple of questions.
I'm pretty sure that it had something to do with wanting to paint.
She was talking about when spring was. she was in Eternal Spring, and if she was going to be stuck somewhere, then she says, I hadn't quite worked up the nerve to request whatever it was that was in the back of my mind when I saw the mural.
Did Tamlin or Lucian ever grow tired of day after day of Eternal Spring, or ever venture into the other territories, if only to experience a different season? I wouldn't have minded endless mild spring while looking after my family. Winter brought us dangerously close to death every year. But if I were immortal, I might want a little variation to pass the time. I'd probably want to do more than lurk about a manor house, too, though I still hadn't worked up the nerve to make the request that had crept into the back of my mind when I saw the mural. So the way that I take that is she switched her thinking to, I would want to do more than lurk about a manor house.
Right. So I felt like the question in the back of her mind to the Suriel is, can I leave the spring court and go other places?
But I don't think she's thinking about a question for the Suriel. I read it like she's thinking of a request to Tamlin.
Okay.
I think she's thinking about requesting stuff to paint.
I wonder, too, if it's a little bit about why the human lands were all smudgy and dark. Like,
I don't know. It could just be like going back to visit her family.
It just seemed
that's what I thought it was. Like, what she wanted to ask the Suriel is, like, if she stayed, could she go back and visit sometimes?
Yeah.
And I mean, he does pretty much answer that question.
Sense.
That does make sense. That makes good sense too. It struck me. I don't know why that line jumped out at me, and then I was like, well, what is she talking about?
Well, and I liked too that kind of foreshadowing of like, if I were a fae, I would want to do more than just like hang around the house like Tamlin's been doing, which she does, right? Like when she becomes a fae, she does a whole lot more than just lurk around the house, which she could have just stayed in Valaris all the time and gone to the symphony every day, and she could have done that, and she chose not to.
That's what I would have done.
I know, right? Before we move totally into the Suriel, I wanted to just share this quote that I loved so much. She thinks to herself, I should have known better than to think that maybe there would be someone, human or fairy or whatever, who could understand what I had become these last few years, and just how she feels so like alone and different and like other in the spring court. And I wrote that quote down, and then I wrote down Rhys, Cassian, Mor, Azriel, Amren, like all of them have these threads of similarity with her, and the experiences that she's had and the struggles that she's had and the dark times that she's endured, and she really truly finds like people who get her in the night court. She
finds her tribe.
Yeah, and I love that for her. So let's move into
I love that journey for her.
I love that journey for her. Yeah. So Lucian tells her how to catch the Suriel, which I just think is so funny.
That whole conversation just cracked me up. The whole like hypothetical about it all, and like the back and forth. You get their rapport.
But like, also, do you think he was hoping she would die?
Yes.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100% do. Because before, a few chapters before, he basically is saying in code to Tamlin, forget this girl, forget the curse. We need to rise up and kill this bitch. Talking about Amarantha, right? And I think he's hoping, well, if this favorite girl happens to die, then what other choice are we going to have?
I mean, he thinks she's a distraction, you know?
Yeah.
Well, he's not currently wrong.
I know, right?
I did love how he's like, if I get caught helping you, like there's going to be a lot of hell to pay, and I'm not talking about Tamlin. And it's like he's kind of risking a lot to try to get her out.
Did you underline what he said? He told her something like, I might be in the other woods where I could hear a scream. And she said, well, it's good that you have superior hearing because I possess the superior ability to keep my mouth shut.
I loved that too.
Which in this instance is true, but generally not.
Yeah.
But I loved how he just was like, okay, so if in theory I was a Suriel, I would, but I did want to read that real quick. He said, I'd probably have a weakness for groves of young birch trees in the western woods and freshly slaughtered chickens, and would probably be so greedy that I wouldn't notice the double loop snare rigged above the grove to pin my legs in place. And it's a little foreshadowy for me of whenever Feyre goes back to the spring court in the third book, because Tamlin is so greedy for her.
He doesn't see
what she's doing, and it is so obvious
I love
what
that,
she's
yeah.
doing. Yeah. But I'm excited to talk about the Suriel. I have a lot of fun things I want to say.
Well, let's get into it. So she follows Lucian's advice. She goes exactly where he tells her, does exactly what he tells her to do, and she sits and waits. And eventually the Suriel comes exactly like Lucian suggested that they would, and she snares the Suriel, and they have a nice little conversation. Super sweet. Very friendly.
So charming. I want to talk a little bit about the description of the Suriel because I'm going to tell on myself a little bit that a lot of times when I read and it's a good story, and through the second reread, I didn't catch all this. I tend to gloss over like highly descriptive things, which is such a dumb thing to do. But like I'll be like, oh, I just want to get to the rest of the story, so I don't care what it looks like. And so, but when I was reading this time and like really trying to like, take it all in, the description is so terrifying. Like this thing, it's tall, thin, veiled in black robes. It's got spindly, scabby gray arms. And then this quote like if you just listen to it, like I feel like I'm reading a horror story. Face that looked like it had been crafted from dried, weather-worn bone. Its skin either forgotten or discarded.
That's what my face looks like.
A lipless mouth and 2 long teeth held by blackened gums. Just try to picture this. Slitted holes for nostrils.
I was envisioning Voldemort.
I was too.
I did that too.
I definitely did. Eyes that were nothing more than swirling pits of milky white, the white of death, the white of sickness, the white of clean-picked corpses. Is that the most disgusting thing?
I think it sounds hot.
That's hot.
I just like
Daddy's Suriel.
that is like the most like descriptive. Like I'm really
descriptive.
like I'm really like appreciating Sarah J's attention to detail and her like descriptiveness of these things. Like I really got a mental picture of how disgusting this thing was.
Well, one thing too that I really like about her writing in general and the way that she characterizes is the characters that are the creepiest, the scariest, the like grossest sounding are usually the ones that end up being
The most helpful.
yes, like some of the best, most loyal, trustworthy, because she does the same thing. Not that Rhysand is like creepy looking, but she makes him sound really scary, right? And like super dangerous. And the characters that are so beautiful, so handsome,
Ianthe.
yeah, right. And Amarantha too.
Yeah.
Like the ones that look like they would be amazing and wonderful just because they're so attractive end up being diabolical. You know? That's true with the Suriel, right?
Yeah.
Like it becomes one of they.
It does say it's a he. I always pictured it as a she. I don't know why, but it definitely is a he.
So he becomes really like a friend to Feyre and a sort of weird like mentor in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
In all three of the first 3 books.
Well, isn't he what's her face's brother? Who's the chick in the woods where Feyre has to go get the ring?
No, that
the
is
bone
the bone
carver.
carver. The bone carver is her brother.
Who is in the prison?
wood. Yeah, the bone carver's in the prison. That's their other brother is Cochet from Silver Flames.
Okay, gotcha.
I remember everything. So she basically is trying to find out, can I leave? Right? Like, can I leave and still be okay? Can I leave and my family still be okay? Like, how's that going to work? And so the Suriel is like, yeah, you can't leave. If you leave, you and your family will be killed. Like, you'll be signing their death warrant. And she is kind of really crestfallen by that and loses all hope, which I feel like she's lost hope several times in the last few chapters. Like,
well, it's only been a week.
I know. Well, but she keeps having these situations of like, this is it. This is how I'm going to get out of this. And then it's like, no, I can't.
So before we get further into kind of what they do next, do you mind if I talk a little bit about the lore of what I found about
Please
the
do.
Suriel? I have found the more we do this podcast that, all these authors say like, well, I just came up with a name. That's not true. They're all lying.
It just sounded cool.
Right. So the legend of the Suriel, which is also known as the Suriel or the Sahariel, something like that, is that Suriel was an archangel. And according to the book of Enoch, the Suriel was one of the leaders of angels who lusted after the daughters of men. So he would descend from Mount Hermon and acquire the wives, but lead the men astray. He also taught men about the course of the moon, which to me, as I'm thinking of it, I was like, did he teach them about menstrual cycles?
That's the first thing I thought of when you said that.
He's like, I'm going to lead you astray, but look, I'm going to tell you when you're going to know.
I'm going to give you some good info.
This is when your wife needs cake.
It's either that or he's talking about the tides.
Right, exactly. So Suriel is actually talked about in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I did not know that either. So he was one of the 7 holy angels that were presided to watch over the spirits. Some of the lore call him the governor of death that fell from heaven. And in some lore, he's actually a woman. So he has been said to be able to cause the death of millions at once and to be able to start the apocalypse. He would be able to take on multiple quote unquote old ones at once and can kill anything affected by death except those equal to him or greater to him in power. He has the potential to rule the entire universe. His power is the highest caliber in the angelic court. He has limitless power, immense strength, and the demons of hell fear him. He can smite his opponents. He can also choose where someone gets transported in death. So if they're going to heaven or hell, and that rules over anyone else's decision. He can make that decision. He is nearly invulnerable to anything and is immortal. He's lived in millennia and has absolute knowledge, but he can also bring back humans, angels, demons, and gods from death. He can perform angelic curses and bind his opponents. So here's where it gets interesting for me.
See, I thought it already was.
I know. I'm enthralled.
So we have been talking about the connection between these books and the Crescent City books and how I continue to think that the Crescent City books are set in the past. So one of the characters that has been called the Angel of Death in Crescent City is whom? The Umbra Mortis, who is Hunt Athalar. So the Suriel is described as having wings that are dark gray and he can fly. He has blackish brown hair. He is known to release divine white light from his hands and manifest kinetic force, which can create light spears from the sky.
Stop it.
He has great speed and reflexes. He can manipulate death and can kill anything. He knows how everyone will die and can sense the coming of death. And then you guys are like staring at me and my heart's pounding.
My jaw dropped.
Excited when I found this. I was like, how? It is no coincidence that all of these things are the same.
Yeah.
That's
There's no way.
Crazy.
Right. So again, wings that are dark gray and he can fly. He has blackish brown hair. He can release divine white power from his hands to manifest kinetic force, which can create light spears from the sky.
So you're thinking that Hunt
Is
in Crescent
the Suriel.
City is the Suriel.
Yes. Would that not be kind of badass?
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
And it would also explain why the Suriel helps Feyre.
Yeah.
And,
It would also
you know what I mean?
explain what might happen when Bryce goes into their world.
But the Suriel died at that point.
Did he? See, I don't know. But what if
Well,
did he?
I don't know.
did he?
Right.
We don't know what happened to Hunt when she left him.
Well,
No,
no,
I
she
mean
said
the
the Suriel.
Suriel
So that's
in
the
Wings
thing.
But if
and
Hunt
Ruin.
is the Suriel,
Right. And that's kind of what I'm saying,
Oh,
too.
okay, I see what you're
So
saying.
that might be like something she's got to go back and find out. Like maybe he goes to find her, or maybe he does live and lives for that long beyond her. And there's
Maybe it's like a descendant and not necessarily, or an ascendant.
well, the Suriel in lore,
Antecedent?
a descendant is what you're looking
No,
for.
the opposite. A descendant comes after you. What comes before you?
Your mom?
I'm having such a what?
I don't know what you're saying. No, but there's there's so much that can happen Like in terms of like a time loop, right? Because I'm wondering if she goes and, she kind of begs for the place that's going to like be able to help her, right? And she ends up in Prythian. So, what if she can't find Hunt again? You know what I mean? And what if it is because
that would be a huge bummer.
No, it would not.
Oh.
Hunt is boring, except for what's in his pants.
Let's not get into that.
No, the only thing that's not boring about Hunt is his dick. I mean,
I disagree.
I think he's adorable.
He's adorable, but he's not very exciting. Like, I'm sorry that you guys disagree with me. A lot of people agree with me. I'm just going to say, no, here's the thing. I don't mind Hunt so much. There has been a lot that has been said in other books about the mating bond and what happens. And I see a lot of things that aren't between he and Bryce that Sarah J. Maas has talked about in other books in terms of a bond. Like, they don't have a snap, essentially, like a rubber band snap, like all of her other mates do.
I thought they did.
No, he can't tell when she's in danger, and she can't tell when he's in danger. They can't communicate, and like nothing ever like kind of clicked into place for either of them.
What about when he saves her when she's at the gate? He somehow knew she was in trouble and he found her.
That was because he said there was something she was emitting or something.
Okay.
Yeah, or maybe he could sense the demon that was there.
Keep in mind, I've read these once, and I gloss over all the details. So I'm literally asking a question. I'm not trying to like debunk.
Right.
Trust
no,
me.
So it's funny because you guys are both staring at me, and there's listeners somewhere going, "Fuck yes, someone finally said it."
No, like my jaw dropped. Like I'm really like I'm totally behind this.
I
now.
really
I do like the Suriel Hunt connection.
I know.
Yeah.
I do too.
I like
And
that
you know
a lot.
what? Like if he continues to be in the books, I don't think he's so boring that he's not a great character. Like if they're in game, like I won't be mad or anything like that. But I would really love it if I think it would be a really amazing twist if they don't end up together and he is the Suriel. Yeah. That would be really cool.
That would be cool.
So I was late prepping you guys. Like I made them wait for me for a few minutes because I got further and further down this rabbit hole, and I was like, I'm not done. I'm not ready.
To your point
was
too,
worth it.
the one thing that I thought it was really interesting that the Suriel said when she asks, like, "You're not wearing a mask. You're not part of like what court? Like
I'm not part of a court."
Exactly. He says, "I'm member of no court. I'm older than the High Lords. I'm older than Prythian, and I'm older than the bones of this world."
Right.
Which is like if what you're saying is true, like
That fits.
that fits.
Yeah.
Right. I hope that Sarah J. Maas doesn't call us and is like, "What the fuck, you guys?"
Like, shut up, you guys! Quit
Stop
giving away
it.
my secrets.
Honestly, though, if she did, that would mean that she listened.
So you know what? Call us. Our email is
great.
ournerdiestthing@gmail.com, or you can find us on Instagram, SJM.
So let's talk about what the Suriel tells Feyre. He says, if you go home, you and your family will be killed. He tells her Tamlin is actually the High Lord of Spring Court, which I kept forgetting that she did not know until that moment.
But I realize they remind us that so much throughout these first chapters.
Yeah. He tells her that you need to be more specific with your questions. Like, I'm tricky, right?
Sassy Suriel.
I'm tricky and I can give very, very tricky answers. So you got to be real specific with your questions, which I thought was really funny. He says, stay with the High Lord, human. He will shield you from it. So stay close to him and all will be righted. And I loved how Feyre was like, that is not an answer. That made me laugh. And then he starts to tell her about Hybern. So do you guys want to talk about the stay with the High Lord before we talk about the stuff with Hybern and the Deceiver?
Sure, yeah, let's. I did want to. I wrote something down in my book because people have pointed this out too. When she first meets him and they start to talk, she talks about how her bowels go watery. Oh, yeah. And I wrote in the margin of my book, I was like, "Does everyone in this universe have IBS?" Because yes, my stomach hurts sometimes when I'm like nervous and stuff, but everyone's always talking about being about to shit their pants.
I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure Feyre says that multiple times.
Right. Maybe stop eating curry, Feyre.
It's that fey food. It tastes good, but at what cost?
Let's drop the dairy in the curry and you'll be fine.
So a lot is made later on about this. Stay with the High Lord. He will protect you. Just stay with him and everything will be righted.
And he says it multiple,
more than once.
Yeah, 3 to 4 times at least.
And I know a lot of people think and, obviously the Suriel does not specify.
That's
which
what I
High
wrote.
Lord,
I said,
right?
he says stay with the High Lord, but he doesn't say which High Lord.
Well, and in later conversations, in later books, when Feyre meets the Suriel another couple of times, they have this same conversation, right? Stay with the High Lord until everything is righted. And people are like, well, obviously the Suriel's talking about Rhys because eventually that's who she ends up with. And I actually think that the Suriel is being like a prophet here, like Old Testament style. If you study the Old Testament, there are prophecies that scholars say, like, okay, well, this has like a double meaning or a triple meaning. It's talking about this, but it's also talking about this. And I think that's what the Suriel is doing. I think he is telling her to stay with Tamlin.
For right now.
Exactly. Like, Tamlin will protect her from Amarantha. He does protect her from Amarantha until everything is made right, which I think means stay with Tamlin until you figure out that you really need to be with Rhys, right? And then you're with your mate and everything is made right. And then you need to stay with him, and he's going to protect you from Amarantha also, because who comes and help? We'll get to that when we get to the Under the Mountain stuff. But Rhysand protects her from Amarantha. Rhysand protects her from Tamlin. Rhysand protects her from herself.
Yeah.
Well, and that makes me think, and again, Miss Queen of Details, remind me if I'm getting this wrong, but essentially, like, Tamlin tells her to go, like, very Disney Beauty and the Beast style, like, go ahead and go. You need to go back to your family. I'm fucked. And so there's a part of me too that wonders if the Suriel is saying, like, stay with the High Lord, like, don't leave.
Yeah.
Because that's how they all end up under the mountain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's a part of me that wonders if she hadn't left, would there have been like an uprising, right? She had already met Rhys. It wasn't like she wasn't going to meet him.
That would have been really interesting. I wonder how the story would have I think if that had happened, it probably still would have ended up with Under the Mountain. And I think that whole conversation that Feyre has with Amarantha probably would have happened like at Tamlin's manor instead of Under the Mountain. But I don't think anything really would have changed. If she had not left when Tamlin told her to leave, first of all, what would Tamlin have done if he told her to do something that he thought was protecting her and she didn't do it, right? Because we know Tamlin doesn't deal with that.
That's a good point. He probably would have like made her go to sleep again and just dropped her off,
taken her away, right? But if she was there when the 50 years ran out and the big crowd of whoever people that trashed the manor came, Rhys says later on he went to make sure that she was gone and safe. And so if she had still been there when that whole crew came and trashed the manor, Rhysand would have had to have figured out, he would have had to try to figure out how to protect Feyre, not make Tamlin do something stupid, not show his cards to Amarantha, not reveal that Feyre is his mate. And I'm not sure how he would have been able to do that. Although he is Rhysand, he probably would have.
That would have not been as good of writing. That's why it didn't happen.
Yeah, that was too complex, too complicated. So then she goes in. The Suriel, then starts talking about Hybern and explaining, this is the threat. This is what's going on with the wall. Let me tell you about this blight. Right. And so we were talking before we started recording a little bit about this deceiver. So do you guys want to talk about the deceiver a little bit?
We just had questions. Well, it's because the Suriel gets cut off. Like,
I know. I didn't remember that the Suriel was like, girl, I'm going to tell you everything.
And then it's like, oh,
ready.
shit, we're not alone. Yeah.
I did not remember
that. And it was like, that's exactly where it gets cut off. He says, one of Hybern's commanders disobeyed him 50 years ago. He was called the Deceiver. Oh, wait, there's somebody else here.
So the Suriel is telling Feyre that there was a commander 50 years ago that deceived him. And I didn't know who that was. And I forgot that Amarantha was a part of his army. Right?
So,
is that right?
Yes. Okay. So here's the deal. Here's how I understand it. So Hybern, 100 years prior, starts to make moves to, like we were saying earlier, like go back on his bullshit again and get the lands back and reverse the treaty, basically. Amarantha was one of his commanders. And 50 years ago, Amarantha kind of went off on her own not with Hybern's permission, I don't think. No, actually, I think that Hybern might have known what Amarantha was doing. I think that I think somebody tells us later Amarantha was like an experiment to see how easily Prythian would fall and like how much work Hybern was going to have to do to like completely take over. I think the Suriel refers to her as the deceiver, not because she deceives Hybern, but because she deceives Prythian. Because we find out later that what happened was she was pretending to be like a peacekeeper, emissary, courtier kind of person, and is like, I'm going to throw you guys a party because we're going to open trade again between Hybern and Prythian. And then all the High Lords, in a show of like peace and what am I trying to say?
Prosperity.
When you mean, no, like when you mean well, in a goodwill, in a sign of goodwill, like all the High Lords go to this party, but she cast a spell, and when she gave the toast and the High Lords drank the drink, the spell took their power from them.
Stop it, Whitney. Whitney, you guys is doing shit behind the thing that's making me laugh. We're gonna have to do one of these like live one time or something. Like we're just kind of crazy.
We're just some goofy girls.
That's right. I don't even know what you were saying.
But no, I think the Suriel calls Amarantha the deceiver because of her tricking Prythian and the High Lords into stealing their power and imprisoning them, basically.
So
I don't think
that's
it's deceiving Hybern, it's deceiving everybody else.
Is that when she puts the 50-year curse on Tamlin at the same time? Because she was like, hey, you want to fuck? And he said, no
thank
you're disgusting.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, what did you call him? An awkward motherfucker earlier?
I think I called him a social weirdo. But awkward motherfucker works.
Amarantha's like, wow, that awkward motherfucker looks really kind. She's like, I feel like Amarantha heard from somewhere, but some woman was like, so he's super weird, but he fucks. And she's like, I want a piece of that. And he's like, no, thank you. I bet you probably have an STD because you just lied to everyone. So, so I didn't realize that was all at the same time.
That was all at the same time.
It's like the opposite of the he's a 10, but he's a 2, but he has a big dick.
It's just like hit me.
me using the F word is no. Whitney doesn't even blink twice because I say it all the time. And then when Mindy says dick, Whitney cannot stop laughing.
It was just so unexpected.
By the way, Apple Podcasts rated this as clean.
I
might
saw
want to change
that. I was literally just thinking we're gonna have to change that.
They saw nerdy and thought we were clean.
Oh, they were like, "Oh, that's so
adorable.
Sweet. Those sweet girls."
Oh my gosh, I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh yeah, no, I was gonna say the punishment for Tamlin was twofold, or maybe even threefold. I think. Well, 2. Let's go with twofold. It was for Tamlin for rejecting her, but it was also for the rest of Prythian because it's like, I'm going to give you guys just a tiny thread of hope that you can get me out of here, but there's no way that you're actually going to beat me because Tamlin is
look who I made get somebody to fall in love with.
Tamlin is not going to get anybody to fall in love with them, but she underestimates Ferris.
Naivety.
Well, just like her desperation for somebody to take care of her and love her and and be nice to her.
I mean, honestly, anyone in her situation would have fallen in love with Tamlin.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, and even us as the reader fall in love with Tamlin.
About to say the first time I read it, I fell in love with Tamlin.
All the time you see in these fan groups where people are like, so the second book's about re-sand.
Yeah,
where's tampon? I mean, Tamlin.
They get interrupted, which again, I just think it's hilarious that the Suriel's like, I'm going to tell you everything. But then the Suriel realizes that they are not alone and that the Naga are there, which is what we're going to talk about next time. But before they stop the conversation, really, the Suriel again repeats, run back to the house, go back to the High Lord's manor, remember what I told you, right? Stay with the High Lord. And I actually wrote down all the multiple meanings of that. Stay with Tamlin so you don't die. Stay close to Rhys so he can protect you under the mountain. Stay with Rhys when Amarantha kills you so you can see Prythian rebuild. So she's like hangs on to the tether between her and Rhysand and doesn't actually die. Stay with Rhys because he's your mate and will make your soul right. stay with Rhys when he dies in battle in Wings and Ruin so that you can bring him back and everything will be righted. So I think it's like one prophecy that means a bunch of different things. I don't think it's like, well, he wasn't talking about Tamlin. He was talking about Rhys. I think he's talking about both, but just different situations, different circumstances.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So now it's time to talk about our nerdiest thing of the week. So I'll go ahead and go first. I am really into true crime. I am a murderino.
You're trying to say since when am I the one that is correcting what you say? Like, you're a murderino. And that's from My Favorite Murder.
Now I just feel bad because I keep feeling... Well, no, this is just for me saying this to you guys.
We're going to definitely have this in the episode. This shit's funny.
We're definitely having a gag reel if it doesn't go in.
Oh my gosh. It's just embarrassing that I can't talk. I am a murderino and I like true crime. So I binged the Dahmer series on Netflix, which is about Jeffrey Dahmer. That's what Robbie was like, why would you ever watch this? It is super interesting. And it's one of those things that it was like, yes, I know who that is. And I know that story, but there were a lot of details that I had no idea had ever happened.
Was it you and our friend Holly that were texting in the group chat about how one of the victims' mom saw herself on there and like they didn't ask her permission or anything and they like literally repeated what she said on the news, and she said it was like reliving the entire thing again.
Yeah, there are some problematic aspects of it. It's a Ryan Murphy miniseries, and a lot of people have issues with the way that he does things. I personally,
what else has he done?
He did one about the Versace murder.
Okay, yeah.
And I think he did the O.J. Simpson trial too. I think that was him.
I mean, it's gotta be hard because I think sometimes people are like, well, like, we want to tell this story and we want people to understand how these things can happen and how serial killers typically seem like your, everyday Joe type of guy, and it's usually very charismatic. But I think there are so many times, and it's gotten really bad in the internet age of like not seeing people as people.
Yes.
And they forget that there were victims and their family members are still alive, and this opens up a lot for people.
I feel like I felt like they did a really good job not just focusing on Dahmer, but on victims and the impact of on their families. And there's always an aspect when you dig deeper into stories like that of if this person had done their job the way they were supposed to, a lot of that stuff would not have happened. Right. And there were multiple instances of people just dropping the ball, which are just details that I did not know. And it was interesting and infuriating. And one of those things, it's like, we've got to figure out how to make this system work better because the system failed a lot of people, and it didn't have to be that way.
Well,
but
yeah,
it was really
and I mean,
interesting.
That's why there's so much emphasis on being an advocate for yourself in the criminal justice system, because, I mean, there's a lot of human error that happens because, detectives are understaffed. There are just things that maybe they didn't see at the time. Maybe something got misfiled. It could have been that they didn't give a shit. Like, there's a lot of things that can go into play. Or maybe it even seemed like they didn't give a shit and they're just incompetent.
Right.
And I'm not saying that all detectives are. I don't want anyone to think that. But, the fact of the matter is these are things that are trying to be solved. And in this instance, something that there wasn't tons of experience in at the time. Mm-hmm. And you have someone going like, how would you go from like, okay, there's this victim and this victim and this victim, so it must be a serial killer and it must be this type of suspect and it's probably a white guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's a lot to glean from not having that historical knowledge that we have now.
Well, that wasn't the issue with
I know, but
them.
I'm saying like the human error part. Like, you've got to be able to put together some things that maybe no one has ever heard of before to solve these types of things. So, but anyway, I'm never going to watch, so,
Well, it was good. I also watched, much shorter, but also on Netflix, The Sins of My Mother, which is a very similar kind of look at the Lori Vallow case, which I won't go into the details of it, but it was very interesting because it kind of deals with a little bit of like cult brainwashing kind of stuff, and another instance of like somebody being able to use their charm and looks to get away with stuff for a little bit and not be looked at maybe as closely as they should. But I like that kind of stuff. It was good.
Mine's, I don't know if it's necessarily nerdy. It's more of, I feel like a huge dork. But for starters, for those of you who don't know, I am the oldest one of us three. And I'm not old I'm not like a grandma or anything, but like I'm definitely older than the other.
In my day, we didn't have those interwebs.
Shut up, Suriel.
Even if you were a grandma, you'd be a hot grandma.
Well, thank you.
Like I'm 40-year-old virgin. You're a hot grandma.
That being said, I definitely am on the verge of being a different generation.
I thought you were about to say on the verge of being a grandma. And I was like, what?
Surprise! No, I'm like right on the edge of a different generation, I do believe. And so the nerdiest thing for me this week is that after last week's podcast, Deb and Whitney sent out like the social media schedule, and Deb was asking me to do things, and I didn't know what I was going to do because I don't know how to use Instagram very well.
That's okay. We took care of a few things.
Definitely
no big deal.
not good at social media. I've never been on Twitter. Like I'm on Twitter, but I don't use
I
it.
think Twitter's a little overrated, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not on Twitter.
But like I will say I do not have a TikTok account.
I do.
I only see TikToks when Whitney sends them to me.
Well, there
You're
is
welcome.
there is that Instagram that says, I'm not on TikTok. I watch my TikTok videos on Instagram 2 weeks later like an adult.
My sister, who does listen to the podcast, so shout out to Catherine. She'll send me videos that she sees on Facebook, and I'm just like, I saw that like 3 months ago on TikTok. But keep sending them, Catherine. I like them.
You can send them to me, Catherine. I've not watched them yet.
You can definitely send it to me because I haven't been on TikTok.
Meemaw, I'll be like, how do I
And probably
open
not
this?
Facebook either.
Okay, so my nerdiest thing this week, I keep holding my iPad up in front of Mindy's face because she's sitting next to me and I need it to like look at my notes. Sorry, Mindy.
She doesn't want to look at my
We've been
face.
together for 48 hours and I'm like,
She's
fuck
done with me.
you. No, we actually had a really good time. So first of all, my ongoing nerdiest thing this week is our cocktail of the week, and it is called the Everlong iced tea, and I got it out of a book of rock cocktails that I bought my husband for Christmas a couple of years ago. And of course, Everlong is a throwback to Foo Fighters. But the reason I wanted to do a Long Island iced tea this week is because we know that Suriel loves to spill the tea, and we'll see that several times during this series. So my other nerdiest thing this week is I really like to listen to books on tape when I'm doing my design work, but I needed a
Did
little...
you just say books on tape? Okay, I am
grandma
not the grandma of this group.
Yes, I have a cassette player. No, I'm kidding. I had to make my husband throw away a Discman a couple years
The
ago.
80s called. They want your books on tape back.
You know what? I can listen to things on Instagram. I listen to audiobooks on my iPad and on my phone when I'm working. But this week, I'm a very petite person, and my headphones hurt my ears after a while, which I know is so silly. But so I started watching some movies, and Netflix has this what am I thinking of right now? This section right now that is like Halloween scares, and I love Halloween category. Thank you. And so I started watching, and I'm not for sure if this is what the title of the movie is. I'll have to look it up, but it was like something like Super Killer Babysitter Queen or something, and it had like 4 stars. And so I'm like, okay. And so I start watching it. It was so campy and so freaking hilarious. I loved it. And apparently it's a sequel. I don't really think you need the first one to follow along. Although
stands on its own.
my nerdy ass spouse knew that it was a sequel when I told him about it. But the babysitter who was prevalent in the first movie, but only at the end of the second movie, is the chick that's on Ready or Not. I don't know if anyone has seen that, but so I watched that right afterwards. It's a movie that came out of right before the pandemic started about a woman that marries into essentially like a Hasbro company, and they have to play a game on the wedding night. And so she draws the hide and seek card, which means that she has to hide, and they have to kill her before the sun rises. And it's real campy too, and really fun. And she's kind of a badass chick. So that's what I did on Friday afternoon, as I watched those two movies and really had a really, really good time. Yeah, I did not listen to books on tape because my ears hurt.
The 2022 version of
Yeah, I
Books
did.
on Tape.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for today. Next week, we are going to be reading through chapters 15, 16, and 17. We're getting closer and closer.
We're like a third of the way through.
Almost.
Yeah.
What are you guys going to do when we have to take a break before season 2? What are you going to do?
I'm in denial about that.
Bonus episodes. We've got
I
one
was gonna
coming
say,
soon. For exclusive content and to keep up with all things nerdy, follow us on Instagram at Our Nerdiest Thing. We post book reviews, what to read next, and our cocktail recipes. Have something nerdy that you'd like to share? Email us at ournerdiestthing@gmail.com. This podcast is edited and produced by The Story Guides. Thanks for listening.